I need to get out of the way.
Can someone do a ping in the chat that we're back without DC?
I did right before I left.
Oh, beautiful.
People should already be leaving.
Perfect.
What's wrong?
I'm going to go sit down in the table with people.
Design books.
Yeah, basically. I assumed that people wanted me to do that. So.
All right, folks,
Here I
if
am.
you do not have a Jill signature, that means your book should re-enter the,
Yes, everybody.
Okay, I just have a all right.
we're just passing, like we grab books and we see if we sign them and then we pass them on if we've already signed them.
Oh my God. Okay, got it.
Oh,
you already see it.
Exact
Time.
Because I think I
Jill's
did like
time is
2
more
today.
precious than mine. I'll get all copies later.
All right. Now we can learn how to be a DC admin. As a note, this has been pared down because it's normally like 2 hours or 2.5 hours. So I removed a lot of the like how to be an admin stuff for admin rules. But let's get into it. So first, our threads. We have the main thread for normal designs, new members thread for members first Dakota only, soul pool for any designs with items applied, import updates for edits to already uploaded Dakotas, and design den for free designs for people who can't design or commission them. And then we have skip designs and special base identifying. These are both ones that new DC admins don't need to worry about. Also, I'll mention that this is also a handbook that DC admins can refer back to, so there's a lot of text on here. I'm gonna kind of fly through it, but it's also meant as a resource for people to look back on. For priority, we usually try to do our corrections thread first, so that's not sitting because they've already waited to get judged the first time. And then new members, because it's their first experience in Dakota's Design Central. And then all the other threads. So ideally, the goal is to keep it 1 to 2 weeks wait time and all monthly threads and corrections under a week. And for quota, corrections count for the same value as their DC thread equivalents. So soul pool corrections counts the same as soul pool thread. So this is the anatomy of the DC submission. So on the left is the stash. Looks a little different now, mostly the same. The design at the top, and then the import info is usually in the description of the stash file. Now sometimes it's in the comments because GA likes to mess with us. But that is all info that needs to be, will transfer to the Dakota's Dakotna page and needs to be formatted correctly. And then the DC form is in the comments. That's information for DC and uploaders. And then the journal comment is where you're actually on the DC journal and linking to the stash file. Reviewing designs. So each month, our monthly limits is listed at the top of the DC journal. You can also find it in your own monthly limits page. Import updates and corrections thread don't count towards monthly limits because they're not new Dakotas. And Linus Totem and Dire Dunks can add 1 additional submission per month. So the first thing you should do always in tracking or reviewing a design is to track the monthly limits. This is so you don't forget it. It should be your habit to do that first. You'll have a link to a member's bonuses and monthly limits in the DC form, but you can also find it on their page. And when you're an admin and you're viewing their bonuses and monthly limits, you'll see in the corner a Manage Limits button. When you go to that page, this is what you'll see. You can track the DC and DD, Designed End submissions there. All of those are tracked in the Design Central category. If Lioness Totem is active that month, it'll automatically add to their max limit. And then Dire Dunks is its own line, and they have to list that in their form. When the month has ended, it looks a little bit different. So Takotno will be moved on to the next month, and DC will be closing the previous month. Lioness Totem doesn't show up there, so you just need to make sure that you are looking at the previous totems before you.
I'm gonna make a bug report about that.
Okay. It's just a little note.
Super fixable.
Yep, so you can just check the previous totems there. And then if you're not sure if you already tracked their monthly limits, sometimes I will track a limit, and then by the time I go back to get items from their bank, I'm like, did I do this? Then you can just go to the recent changes, which is at the bottom of the bonuses and monthly limits page, and check if you've already done that. So now, getting into Judge Design. Are there any questions on the first piece? Okay. So, the basics. The first things that you should do don't actually relate to the design itself. Look to see that the file size and type are correct. So it should be a PNG file type at those exact size. And you, right now, the size is at the bottom of the stash description. And in order to tell what file type it is, you have to double click, so zoom all the way in, and then pretend you're gonna save the image, and then it'll show you in the save as type. Super less convenient than it used to be on DeviantArt, but that is how it is now. If you don't zoom it all the way in, it'll always show it as a JPEG, so just make sure you do that. And then check the background, making sure that it is a correct background. So this first section is on main thread. So is it a free background? Is it the correct hierarchy? It can be the current hierarchy or lower. So in this Dakota, it's an average Dakota and it has an average background. That's fine. And is the build and main correct? So I'm also checking here on these screenshots, if it's not clear, both the import info and the DC form to make sure those all match up. So if something's incorrect in the design, like the design on this one, if it showed a curly main and it's a natural main genome, that would be a design correction. But if the import info said curly, but the design matched the actual Geno proof of ownership, that would be just a form update. And then the gender. So this one is a male Dakota, but it is not showing that it's male, so that would be a correction, a design correction. So they'd have to go to corrections for that. So all of that is checked before looking at the design. Then we go on to a couple more info things. I usually will check the traits first, so making sure that the traits in the import info match the traits in the DC form. And then checking the proof of ownership, so making sure all of that, everything you've just checked, you've kind of matched the design to the import info to the DC form. You've made sure all of those are correct, and now you match that to the proof of ownership. Making sure at the same time that the Dakota belongs to them, that they haven't traded it away, and that if it was a split litter, that they split the litter correctly between the two people. And while you're there, check the parents and make sure that those match what is in the import info template. And then finally, you can go into the actual design. So I always start with just looking at marked colors and accents. Like not necessarily judging them, just looking at them. Like looking at the phenotype, which is at the bottom. This was marked tawny with blanket. So noting that it's marked and there's no collar, no accent. So checking the design. So it has marked, and no color is there, which is good. But then accents are on the design and they're not in the Geno. So I always check those three because they're so common that people are so used to designing them and they will design them even if they're not actually there. Done. It's
Okay.
everybody, but
In all fairness though, you are the terror of DC.
yeah.
It's you. You've invented 2 new base codes.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And next you actually go marking by marking and judge them. So now I'd go into the marked and make sure it matches what the marking should be. And this obviously takes a little bit of knowing and looking at the guides at first. The marked is present on the design, it's acceptable. And then for tawny, making sure that the base coat is correct. It looks like standard guide swatch. You can color pick if you're not sure at first. And then blanket is present and acceptable. And that's that whole design. And then making sure you do a final check over the design. So now you've gone marking by marking, but make sure there's nothing else, because sometimes there's nuances, minimal white, halos, any issues with the flesh or eye color. And then sometimes there's other markings that shouldn't be there that aren't mark colored accents. So just making sure there's nothing else. So in this design, there wasn't much else. There's a nuance in the inner ear, but that was allowable. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I just forgot it. What do you guys correct for uncolored eyes or flesh?
I think for the most part, they can be gray. The tongue is one that should not ever be gray. So that would be the only correction. But you can have just like silver gray eyes and gray nose and paws. So this is the whole process summed up. First, you're tracking the monthly limits, then making sure that the basic properties of the image, so the like image size and format, and then the build, main, gender, hierarchy, those match the import info, and then the DC form info. And then once you've done that, looking at the physical and non-physical traits from the import info to the DC form, matching the DC form Geno to the litter, and then making sure that the proof of ownership is still correct and valid, and the parents, the lineage is correct, and then reviewing marking by marking. Any questions before I move on? Okay. Finally, at this point, you can write up the comment. It's either accepted if you haven't had anything wrong, or all the corrections if there were corrections. So this, well, usually I'll start a corrections comment as soon as I find one thing that's wrong. So I don't have to remember at the end all the things I looked over and found. So on this one, as soon as I saw, oh, the Dakota's male, and it's missing that, then I'll go in and like make a comment and put that in before I continue to review. But this one has Dakota's male, missing his male parts, accents are not present in the Geno and should not be in the design, and then everything else looks good. If you're asking for any, like if you're accepting a design, but then there were info edits. So if this was accepted, but their lineage was wrong, they linked like the dam and the sire spot. In that case, you would have to say accepted and like, please update this in the stash comment. And on the comment on the journal, you would have to say something like accepted, see stash for notes, because DeviantArt won't give them the notification from their stash, so they won't know that there are edits unless you tell them. here are a couple common corrections. If somebody submitted to the wrong thread, you would send them to the correct corrections thread. So if they had a design, they submitted to main thread, and it needed to go to Soulpool because they're applying an item, you'd send them to Soulpool corrections. And nearly all things like this that you send them to corrections for, we want to give them all the corrections at once when possible. So if they submit to the wrong thread, and also they had this thing where accents were in the design, they shouldn't have been, you should give them all of that at once, so they're not going to corrections just to get more corrections. There's a couple more here, like the stash isn't linked correctly. That's like the one case where you can't really judge the design because you can't look at it close up at all. You can send them just to corrections. Wrong file type or size, or if they're using the submissive head pose, all of that is design issues, send them to corrections. Import info in DC form aren't filled out. In that case, it's quite a big ask. It's not just like a, please update this one thing. So that I would send them to corrections so that they can fill out all of that info. And if they did that for a bunch of Dakotas, we technically could consider that placeholding, just tossing a design and not having any of the info ready. People don't tend to do that these days. It's usually just a mistake, like they forgot. If the proof of ownership is wrong, like they've already sold it, or they never split the litter, or if it's at a broken journal, all of those have to go to corrections. Unfortunately, they can't use the Dakota if it's on a broken journal. And then if the DC form is just completely missing, go to corrections. But if it's, I mean, we are a little more lenient these days if there's something wrong in it, not sending them just to corrections for that, and mainly just say, next time, please make sure you do this form completely. Same thing here. Basically, if the import info is there and it's the correct template with just some missing or wrong information, just tack that on to either accepted or design corrections. If the import info has like super outdated template, somehow they got one with the full lineage of like 4 generations, or they got like that personality, like the old one that still has personality in it, just send them to corrections because that's a lot for them to update, and make sure to link them the correct one. And again, like with new stash changes, it's okay for the import info to be a comment on stash. And there's a bunch of other common issues. Basically, all of this is make sure it's formatted as we show in that import info template and the import refs sheets. Any questions on that? The design process. Okay. Next is Soulpool.
I do have one question.
Yep.
And this is more for other people, because you say placeholding doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
But I do know recently we had someone who literally said, I'm placeholding.
Yes.
in the
It's
queue.
rare. That
It's
did
rare.
happen once. Yeah.
And they self-reported themselves to us, so it was very easy to determine what had happened. What is the consequence of too much placeholding?
Like that user got a official warning in the group,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe all their designs just had to go to correction. So it's basically, don't do that, hand slap, but also if you continue to have those warnings against you and it keeps happening, it could eventually result in a ban.
Okay.
Either a DC ban or group-wide ban. Yes?
Does submitting things like Soulpool designs without having like any of the items count as placeholding?
No. So that will come up here, but it depends on that buy for you option. So if you said yes, then we'll buy it for you as long as you have the TG. If you say no to that, you'll just go to corrections. Yeah. Alright. So the process for Soulpool is all of that stuff we just talked about with judging main thread, and then the addition of any items. So you're going to start with the monthly limits, the same design basics, making sure you're checking the background and build, main, gender. Same start to the info too. One difference is that when you're checking the import info for the physical traits and comparing that to the DC form physical traits, obviously if they're adding soul pool water at that point, you'll see the difference there. So at that point, while looking at it, I'll make sure that the amount of traits added compared to the original genome match up to the amount of soul pool water that they've listed in their form. And then you'll just judge the design, or the items before you get to the design. I find like that's the easiest way to go about it. So first, just a quick overview of all of our items.
I recognize that's cool.
There are a bunch of ones that I designed. We got small and large items. The only difference between them is the size. So we have these two circles sizes that show what the size is allowed for them. If you're using a small or large item, you have to list what you're changing or adding, either in the import info as that like item description that'll officially go into Tacona, or just in the DC form. And then the item sizes, like those circles, are kind of approximate. So you see in this one, got like a little bit of that rope that goes outside and then a couple of those leaves. That's something we would consider acceptable as like that large and small item size, because the bulk of it is within the circle. And small and large items have two different categories that they can be. So objects are physical edits. Objects are items, like a hat or flowers or tack. Physical edits are any edits to the fur, traits, physical appearance, and expression. And those would need to be separate items. So if you have like a hat and an expression change on the same Dakota, even if like that large item would cover that whole area for all the edits, those would be two separate ones, one for the physical edits and one for the objects. And then items can't make a Dakota look like a different mane. They can't change the pose, the overall pose, the leg positions, or the face angle of the import that much. They can't make a tail look raised or dominant if it's an average or submissive Dakota. But you can use pieces of other imports, like official lines, like different, you could add like the long mane feet tufts to a natural mane, so long as overall it doesn't make it look like a long mane. And objects can't cover more than 25% of the Dakota, and 25% of the original line art must be visible. Scar packs are pretty simple. You got two circles of size for one scar pack. They can't alter the line art, so if you want scars that alter the line art, you just have to add a small or large item. Hand paints are similar, same size circle as scar packs, 2 of them per hand paint. And they can be up to 2 distinct colors and can have a gradient, and they can't cover more than 1/3 of the Dakota. And then we have a whole bunch of sparkly deity things. Apex hand paints, same thing as regular hand paints, but they glow. We have a bunch of the eye colors and glowing stuff. Aga's charms for the frames, Nagrik's charms for the approved animal decor, and then the backgrounds, and Zoko's trinket. Don't know if that's how you say it.
Close enough.
Yeah. That's mostly for import updates, miscellaneous items. So soul pool water, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what that does, but one physical trait for soul pool water. Some specifics for DC to keep in mind is any tail edited to be less than half its original length will require bobtail trait. And marking ranges on physical traits are scaled.
That's interesting.
So on bobtail, again, marked usually on a normal tail will go about halfway up in its max range. So on a bobtail, it can go about halfway up the bobtail, even though if you overlay the marked range, it wouldn't go up to half of that. But it does scale on those physical traits. And then any ear physical traits can affect one ear or both ears at no additional cost. So you can leave one ear normal if you're adding floppy ears. POTA tokens. You always have to check the parents to make sure any markings that are added or removed are possible. Usually that's very simple, but there's a couple items that you can add to breedings that make it difficult, so just ask if you're not sure. POTAing double merle does add randomly rolled defects, so usually it's kind of rare that we come across it, but if we do, I usually ask people just bring it up in Discord and we make sure that you roll it correctly. Yep.
So if you roll for death or infertility, or I guess if you roll for death when adding double merle, and you don't have the extra token, do you get sent to corrections?
Yeah.
Just until you get that extra token?
Yep, and you can choose to have that additional one ready, and we have a spot on the form for it, but yes, if you decide to risk it and then you got death, then you would be sent to corrections because we can't upload a dead Dakota.
Right, is it safe to say that in DC, it's usually in the player's favor because DC is so final, once you're uploaded, you can't change a lot of this stuff. So like, if there's a chance that you wanna change it, it's gonna go to corrections over just being, you're out of luck,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah, especially with infertile, because that'll still go through and get uploaded. So like, you make sure that you wanna go forward with it being infertile potentially, or just say, nope, I have an extra token, I don't want that.
Cool.
And HP tokens can be applied in Soul Pool. Exactly 38 can be applied to make a submissive Dakota average. Can't do any more or any less, and it'll be uploaded as average. It doesn't have the average badge. And then if you have a faction bonus that gives HP, those only apply to uploaded Dakota, so it doesn't count here. Any questions on those?
Are you sure it's not 37 HP tokens? Because that's what I put every time.
I'm pretty sure it's 38, is it not?
Because it's 75 HP.
Yeah.
You just write it wrong every time?
Yeah, every time.
DC is so nice to you, and you do not deserve it sometimes.
Well, you put yes for buy for you.
Exactly, I'm sure they take the right amount.
Yeah.
But you'll do 38 going forward.
No. We know this.
Alright, move on to the Soul Pool example. So, same start. The file size, making sure that's correct. This one is correct. Then checking the background. So this isn't a free background, but they've listed the 6 stone in their info and form. And it is the correct hierarchy, because it is a background with hierarchy. And checking the main and build are correct. So this is normal, build, and half main. The gender's correct on this one, it's female. And then moving on to make sure that the traits and physical traits match, checking that proof of ownership, and making sure it hasn't been sold off, making sure that the parents are correct. So in this case, all of those checks went through and we're fine. And then you go through the items one at a time to make sure they're acceptable and the item counts are correct. So this one has a large item. So the top screenshot is the import info, and the bottom one is their form. In the form, they've listed what those items are. So there's a large item for fluff on the chest and elbow, which seems like it would fit within that area. And there's 2 small items for the leaves and the main edit, which are both in the same area, but different types. One's the physical edit, one's the object edit. So that works out. There's a hand paint die, which there's hand paints on the face, shoulder, and back leg. So that would actually be 3 different areas. It's also 3 separate colors, so both of those things would mean it would need to be 2 hand paint dies. And they got scar packs. Looks like there's some scars on the side and on the legs, so that's fine. And then we already looked at the 6 stone. So that's what that overlay would look like if you put those on. And here is, like, all of those were acceptable, except for that hand paint die, so it would require one more for that coverage and colors. And then once you've looked at that, you can look at the design. It's the same thing as before. So marked, colored, and accents. The Geno is marked and accents, and there's no collar. So just looking at the design, there's marked and accents in the design, and there's no collar. So all of that is good. And then going through each marking, marked is blended and dark enough. Minimum marked is present there, so all of that is okay. But there is some marked within the inside of the ear, which is outside of range. So that would be the first correction for this Dakota. And the tawny is the next thing in the phenotype, so that looks okay. It's standard base coat. Accents are present and acceptable. Pangare is there, or however you'd like to say it. No, Pangare.
I thought it was Pangerie.
It's however you want to say it.
How does Saf say it? It always sounds so fancy.
I think she says Pangere or something.
Yeah.
A fancier version of the way I always read it.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know why I always say Pangare. It is present and blended enough, but the minimum range is on that stomach. It's not fully there, so that would be the second correction. And then blanket is the last thing in the Geno. That is present and outside of saddle range, which is its minimum. There's like some gradients or colors going on there, which are a bit drastic for blanket. You can have a kind of subtle gradient, but that shift in colors, it would not be acceptable. So that would be another correction. And then again, checking the design for anything else: minimal white, halos, eye color that are crazy, any other items that they're using that aren't listed, or any other markings that are there that shouldn't be. And this one was fine. So here's how that corrections comment for this one would look. Got the 2 hand paint dies that would be needed, and the marked is out of the range. Pangari is not within the minimum range, and then that blanket correction. Any questions? Okay. So, what if the design is acceptable? So, if it was acceptable, didn't have any corrections, you can go to the upload list. You always scroll all the way down to the bottom, because the first parts are for the uploaders and skipped thread. And you put that stash link at the very bottom. Then, if you're doing soul pool, you're going to have to remove items from the bank. On the page that you are at to record the monthly limits, there is a manage bank button. So you can press that. Nice and convenient there. And then this is what it looks like when you're removing items from a bank. So this is the top of the bank. You have the change log at the top, which keeps track of all items you're removing or adding technically, although we don't tend to add in DC. Nothing is removed from the bank until you press save there. And then you have the balance there, so if you need to remove any TT, you can put the number there and press the minus button. There's discounts listed, so it'll show if you need to buy something in TT for them, you can check their discounts. And it'll show you if they have any free decor stuff from their factions. And then there's quick links, so you can jump down to the decor section. Removing items from bank is super simple. You can just use the drop downs and say how many you're gonna remove. So in this case, we had 2 scar packs. You're dropping that down to 2. Once you've selected all the numbers that you'd like, then you just press update items, and all of that moves to the change log. And then if you need to purchase trading post items for people, you can do math. I tend to do math, but there is a cheat sheet that has like every item and then every percentage off. I tend to just find it easier just go to Trading Post and then do a little percentage math, but it's any math, any range of math people can have their way. But all you do is type in the TT, like I said, press minus, it'll go into the changelog. Again, nothing is saved until you press save on the changelog. So if you made a mistake in what you selected and it's now in the changelog, there's just a little X you can press to take it out of the changelog, no problem. And then if you have pressed save and then realized you did the wrong thing, it's easy to just refund or give them back an item. Usually I'll add a little memo in the memo box just to say, whoops, took out too many, putting this back in. And it's easy as that. Any questions with bank?
I know we did do a bitch cabinet training. What happened?
Just a little sliver of it.
That's more. No.
Do we have any non-lessons learned?
I
Everyone's
mean,
been one at one
in
point.
the room, I mean, on the podcast, yeah.
Yeah.
Podcast.
This is news to some people, at least how it looks.
Yeah, this is probably news to them, and they don't know about the scary part of training.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that at the end of this.
Oh, were you threatening everyone?
Yeah, that way.
Oh,
The
right.
threatening.
You can lean in real close to the camera and be like, I will find you.
I will
Drop my
fire
accent.
you.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard Joe will get an email enough times to where I'm thoroughly scared.
Yeah.
I do. I accidentally scared Madge the other day. My bad. That was me.
Alright. So just a couple things in the DC form that are common points of confusion or mistakes. People have to put the entire geno, including the number. Sometimes people leave out the number, but it helps us checking it, like checking the proof of ownership, and it helps the uploaders too. And proof of ownership should be the admin comment for the litter or the geno transfer comment if they traded it.
So sorry, Craig. I'm not trying to be a bother, I swear.
You're not, it's fine. Base coats are not my favorite. No, they're fine. I've done enough time in base coats that I'm beginning to love them, but they are kind of complicated. They can either be from a guide swatch or inherited from a relative. If it's from a guide swatch, super easy. Make sure it matches the guide. If it doesn't look right, color pick it, but you kind of get used to this looks like a guide swatch color probably. If the Dakota is graying, any member can take any non-graying color and desaturate it to make a graying version of it. That's always fine to do. So, and they can also desaturate a graying base further. It can go all the way down to 0 saturation if they'd like. If they have the guide swatch, that needs to be listed in their import info under the base coat section as guide swatch. Where it gets tricky is where it's from a relative. So if the first option on the left, if it was color picked from a relative, then it must be the same color as that relative, so cream or not cream, and obviously the same base, tawny or brown, or any of the others, not excluding them. And then gray versus non-gray, again, it doesn't need to be a gray version. They can desaturate themselves. And also, if they're saying they color picked it from the relative, it must actually be color picked from the relative. It must match that Dakota that they're saying it's from. And it has to be picked from the base coat. So it can't be picked from a marking or an extreme nuance on the Dakota. Usually I suggest when you're designing, if possible, just use the swatches. I know that sometimes they aren't official special bases, and in those cases color picked, but just be careful where you're color picking from. And then if they color pick from a relative, and that relative happens to be a guide swatch Dakota or a official special base, then either of those should be listed in the import info under base coats. So if they color picked from a Dakota and that Dakota turns out that they're male red, then Mel Red should be listed in their base coats even though they color pick directly from relative. If it doesn't match a special base coat and it doesn't match the guide, it's some other mysterious color, and you can't match it, then they should not have anything listed under base coats in their import info. It'll just be uploaded as other, but for the member, they don't list anything, they just leave it blank. And then pretty similar for if they are allowing, like if a relative allows them to pick from a special base coat swatch, then they have to like actually pick from that correct swatch, make sure that it matches that, and also that relative needs to have that special base coat available to them. These days it's a little easier, you can check the Takotna page of that Takota, and it may even just have it listed as a display or within the carried ones. Again, it's like, if you're not sure, bring it up in DC chat and we can look into it and say, yeah, this is Mel Red, it's just a couple generations back, but they can pass it. And in both cases here, the relative needs to be linked in the DC form. So you just make sure you say, oh, this is Mel Red swatch from this Dakota that's linked. We already went over that they need to make sure that they list what they're adding or changing if they're using small items or large items. And then there is the buy for you option in Soulpool and import updates. This is where a member can say, yes, please buy for me if I didn't list all the correct items, if I forgot something, or if I got the count wrong. Like if I thought I needed 2 large items, but I really need 3. If they say yes, we can take pretty much almost any item from their bank. We can't take USD items if they don't have them in their bank. We can't charge them USD, obviously. And if it's a POTA token, we don't take those out for them. Even if they have them in their bank, we send them to corrections and say, are you sure you want to take this out? Because that's just a big ticket item. If they have the item in their bank and they said yes to buy for you, you take that out of their bank. If they don't have it in their bank, but they said yes, you can take their TT equivalent. And if they say no, you just send them to corrections. Say, you need to have these items in your bank, or the TT for them. And bonuses and monthly limits is the only required Takotna link there in the DC form. It, again, is always our first step for each design, and it's needed. But if a member doesn't link it, that's a correction. They have to go to corrections for that. But at the same time, we need to mark that the design has been looked at, so we still will go and find them and mark their monthly limit as used, even though they're going to corrections for that reason. And almost done. I just have a couple things about member conduct and corrections. So when writing corrections, remember that not all members have a detailed knowledge of Takota's markings and guides or design software, and English might not be their first language. So just try to use simple words and sentence structure to avoid overcomplicating the correction. And also just try to be positive and friendly. It can come off as, like, it can be scary and frustrating to get a correction, especially for new members. So just being nice makes it a little easier. When you can, tell them what they should change, not just what's wrong with the design. And always provide swatches and guide examples when possible. So link to a guide example or link to the guide itself. Or if like the graying is off by a little bit, provide a swatch so they can easily color pick from that. So here are 2 examples of the same correction for marked. First example, which is okay. When designing marked, it cannot appear gray and must always look black compared to the base coat. And then it goes on to be a little technical. Marked has a value of 42, please lower it to 18 or less. That might mean nothing to a lot of people. So instead, the better option would be marked as too light. Here's a swatch of possible marked colors. So then you're providing them with the swatches with the correct numbers, so they don't need to worry about that. But you're also telling them what's wrong and how to fix it. In the piebald example, the okay version is piebald has too many small holes and resembles Van Gogh. This might be their first design, they don't know what Van Gogh is. Or it's not fully helpful to say, this looks too much like another marking. Tell me why it doesn't work for the marking it is. So the better option here is piebald has too many small holes. Please fill in some of the holes or create larger ones. So that tells them what's wrong with it and also possible ways to fix it. And we try to find a balance between leniency and matching the guide standards. We don't want to send people to corrections for like 2 pixels off. It's barely outside of range. Or like the marked is 19 instead of 18 value. So there's definitely leniency. You can pass tiny errors and feel okay about it. But finding that balance takes a while for DC admins. So don't get frustrated at first if you have to ask a bunch to figure out that balance between when I can let something go by and when I need to give them a correction. This just DC people should help each other out. Please post in the channel as often as you like. It's best to get a second or third opinion, better to get more opinions on design from other admins before posting a correction than to give a wrong correction to somebody and confuse them. Any fully trained DC admin can help you out with that. And in the chat, we shouldn't be design bashing or calling any designs ugly. We do judge them, but only to the guide standards. So we shouldn't say a design's bear marks are ugly or poorly designed. We should say instead they're incorrect or confusing or wrong. So not judging the quality of the design. And then members, this is thankfully one of the things that was good that came out of DA's changes is that we don't get responses to our corrections. People need to take that now to a howl instead of responding to you in corrections. And if any members try to DM you or reach out to you directly, they should not be doing that. Make sure they're sending a howl instead. That's it. Any other questions?
I have one thing to add to Craeve, which not everybody knows, but you'll figure out very quickly. While you are working on DC, if someone gets belligerent with you, they get mean, they start swearing at you, you are done talking to them. You do not talk to them anymore. You tell me, you tell Craeve, you tell Sam. We will talk to them from that point on. You don't have to be abused while doing DC. We understand it gets heated, but it's still not okay.
Yeah, thankfully that doesn't happen nearly as often as it used to. We used to get back-to-back arguments from people, taking it personally when we're that's just out of range.
We've gotten a lot better atmosphere in the game than we used to have, so we have a lot less drama than we used to have.
And Craeve and staff instituted better language in general for doing corrections, simple language, easy language. Because we have 42 different countries that play this game. Most of them, English is not their first language.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Do you have any examples of disturbing bear marks? I want to know what these disturbing bear marks are.
I have seen some that are disturbing. It's I think the one time I actually saw someone call it something like that is super high contrast, super zigzaggy.
Oh God.
It's burning my eyes. But I don't think they meant it poorly, but it was okay, let's not say that.
Yes. Yeah, we don't, you're not allowed to bash anyone's art in admin chat. I'll fire you. I tell people. Most of the admins know that. Players don't know that. If someone shows up and starts talking shit about your art in admin chat, I'll be like, did you want to be
It's all
fired today? That
It's all
sounds
over.
like you've shown up to be fired, because that shit's not okay.
Yeah.
But, yes, you're right. They meant it's too bright, not it's burning my
Yeah.
eyes. It matters.
Yep.
Alright,
Alright, well, congrats to all the new DC admins.
Alright, what's that?
So I can just go Judge Sopel now, right?
Yeah, just hop right in.
Alright, Craig, ask a question based on what you just taught them, and we'll see who can answer it.
Okay.
Because they're getting a free t-shirt.
Oh, okay.
So, ask a question.
I will answer anything correctly, probably, maybe.
Okay.
Potentially.
Okay, what two threads do not count towards monthly limits?
Towards monthly
Oh,
limits.
Legacy's hand was up first.
Main corrections and Sopal corrections?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but no.
yes. Yes.
Sierra's second.
Corrections and important updates do not count towards your
Yes.
monthly.
So you were right
Okay.
with there were corrections, but yes.
Congratulations!
Yay!
Yeah, t-shirt. Woo. Okay. I'm gonna check what's next on the schedule.
Okay.
I've lost track of the schedule. Thank you, Craig.
I think this is supposed to be social hour now.
This is social hour? Okay. Yeah, we've been doing that all day. So.
Yeah. DC has changed so much since I was a DC admin, and I have mad respect for you and the whole DC team because I don't know if I could go back to DC doing all the extra shit that DC has to do now.
How?
Craig, I want to pitch
Extra.
something to you.
Oh no.
Oh no!
You ready?
Wait, where's the stay with
Like,
me?
what did
Oh, I'm
you
sorry.
want?
Are we still streaming?
Yeah, of course we are.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Bye!